Have you ever lived through a season of life so quiet it felt like the silence itself was trying to warn you, yet you convinced yourself it was only the sound of healing? That was the world I lived in after my wife and I lost 2 pregnancies in a single year. Grief did not break into our home with noise or anger. No, it moved gently, like a draft you do not notice until the room is already cold. In those months, every morning began long before the sun. I would step out into the blue-gray stillness of our small town, start the truck with hands that still smelled faintly of engine oil, and drive to the auto shop where I managed to keep my mind busy. The garage lights were harsh, humming overhead, but they were honest. Machines do not lie. Engines do not hide their problems. And sometimes I envied their simplicity. By late afternoon, I returned home to a house that felt too big for 2 people carrying so much loss. I cooked dinner, folded blankets, washed dishes while the water ran warm over my hands, and tried to build a routine sturdy enough to hold the both of us. She rarely spoke during those evenings, her voice soft and trembled at the edges as if each word had to climb its way out of exhaustion. I learned the exact way she liked the duvet folded, the small pressure points in her arches when her nightmares returned, the gentle tone that would not startle her when she woke in the middle of the night. That was my role. Keep us steady, keep us breathing, keep us from falling apart. But even in my determination, I began to see things that older men often warn you about, the small signs that something deeper is shifting beneath the surface. Some nights she would stare past me, eyes fixed on a point I could not see, like she was listening to a life that no longer included me. The silence between us grew longer too, no longer the peaceful kind but the heavy kind, the kind that made you feel like you were living beside someone instead of with them. Still, I told myself she was grieving. I told myself she was tired. I told myself good men do not turn their back when their wives are hurting. And so I held on. I explained away every strange glance, every late-night sigh, every moment when her hand slipped from mine a little too quickly. Then one morning she whispered the word I had been too afraid to hope for. Pregnant. Her voice cracked when she said it, as if she worried saying it too loud might scare the miracle away. I remember sinking to the bathroom floor with her, our backs against the tub, holding hands like 2 kids making a pact under a blanket fort. 8 weeks, she whispered, not daring to say anything more. That number became our treasure, small and fragile. And as the months moved forward, I did everything I could to bring light back into our home. I talked to the little boy we were expecting, told him about summer baseball and how to fix a carburetor, told him that the world could be good, even when people were hurting. For the first time in a long time, I felt myself breathe easier, like life had finally given us a second chance. I did not know then that hope can sometimes glow the brightest just before it burns out. Have you ever had a moment when something as small as a sound changed the direction of your entire life? A moment so ordinary that you almost ignored it, yet it carried the weight of a truth you were never prepared to face. It happened to me on a quiet evening when the house felt warmer than it had in months and my wife had drifted into a soft sleep on the couch, one hand resting gently on the small swell of her belly. The lamp beside her cast a warm glow across the room, and for a brief second, I let myself believe we were finally safe. Then the phone began to vibrate. At first it was a single buzz, rolling across the coffee table, a gentle nudge in the silence, nothing more than a reminder of the world outside our walls. But then it buzzed again, a little longer this time, almost impatient. Soon, the vibrations came one after another, creating a restless rhythm that filled the room. It felt strange to say, but in that moment the phone sounded like it was breathing, as if something alive was trapped inside it, trying to get my attention. I told myself it was probably a school message or a friend checking in. Nothing urgent. My only thought was that the noise might wake her, and after everything we had been through, sleep was the one thing I never wanted to take from her. So I walked over, meaning only to silence the notifications. But when I picked up the phone, the screen lit up before I could turn it over, and a message flashed across it in bright red text. A heart emoji. Just that, simple and harmless on its own, but in that moment it hit me with a heaviness I cannot fully explain. Before I could lock the screen, another message slid into view. How is my baby tonight? Did you take your vitamins? I wish I could feel him kick. My mind froze. That is what the psychologists call the freeze response. The moment when your body cannot decide whether to fight or run, so instead it does nothing at all. I stood there, staring at the glowing screen, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. And just when I thought I had misunderstood everything, an image appeared from a different app, sent by the same blurred profile picture. It was crude, careless, impossible to mistake for anything other than what it was. My first instinct was not anger, it was disbelief, a sudden vertigo that made the room tilt. She would never do this, I told myself. Not her. Not after everything. I unlocked the phone with the excuse that I needed clarity, though deep down I think I already knew I would not like what I found. Messages stretched back for months. Threads hidden beneath the surface of our quiet home. Whispered check-ins at midnight. Exchanges of photos. Even stolen copies of our ultrasound. The ones I had thought were meant only for us. I placed the phone down gently so I would not wake her and felt something inside me shift. That was the exact moment when the world I had built began to break without a sound. I left the house at 3 in the morning, the hour when the sky does not know whether it wants to be night or dawn. I drove until the lights of town faded behind me and pulled into my best friend's driveway. When he opened the door, one look at me was enough. He did not ask questions. He simply stepped aside and let me in. For 4 days, I lived like a shadow in his spare room, sometimes sitting in the dark with my phone in my hand, staring at the last unread message she had sent. "Where are you? Please answer." My body felt heavy, my thoughts fogged, but somewhere inside the need for truth kept tapping against my ribs. On the second day, I created an anonymous account, nothing more than a blank face and a borrowed name. I searched for the man whose messages I had seen. His social media page was bright and perfect, family photos lined up like trophies. And then I found his wife. With hands shaking, I sent her the message I never imagined writing. "Your husband is having an affair with my pregnant wife. I have proof." She responded the next morning, asking to meet. When she walked into the small cafe, she looked like someone carrying a grief that matched my own. We did not need many words. I showed her what I had found, and she held the phone the same way I had days earlier, as if it were a piece of glass sharp enough to draw blood. Two strangers, sitting across from each other, brought together by the same wound. There was no anger between us, only the quiet understanding of people who had both been lied to in the same language. And in that moment, even through the pain, I felt a strange sense of connection, a reminder that when the truth finally arrives, it rarely comes alone. It brings clarity, and it brings company, even in the most unexpected places. Have you ever walked back into your own home and felt like you were stepping into someone else's life? As if every familiar corner had shifted just enough to make you wonder whether you truly belonged there anymore. That was how it felt the night I finally returned, standing in the doorway with the weight of 4 sleepless days pressing against my ribs. The house smelled of cinnamon, the way it used to when things were still simple, and for a brief moment I almost turned around, almost chose the comfort of ignorance over the sharpness of truth. But the truth was already inside me, and once a man knows what he knows, there is no turning back. She looked up from the couch the second I stepped in, her eyes filling instantly with practiced relief, her hands cradling her belly as if the gesture itself could hold our marriage together. "Mason," she breathed, as if saying my name might erase everything that had happened in the dark corners of our separate days. "You did not answer my calls. I thought something had happened." "Something did happen," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I expected. It was the calm that settles over a man who has run out of ways to avoid the truth. "We need to talk." She stood slowly, moving toward me with the soft steps of someone approaching a wounded animal. When she reached for my hand, I did not give it. Instead, I told her the one thing I needed most. "I want a paternity test." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. For a moment she simply blinked, as if the sentence had lost its meaning on its way to her. Then she let out a small laugh, brittle and hollow, the kind people use when they are trying to buy a few extra seconds to come up with a convincing lie. "You cannot be serious, Mason. You are letting stress eat you alive. The baby is yours. You know that." Gaslighting. That is what therapists call it, the subtle art of making someone doubt their own sanity. And people who cheat, they do it well. They admit just enough to look honest, confess 50% of the truth to hide the 50 that matters most. She did exactly that. She told me I was overreacting, that nothing happened, that the messages were just flirting, that I misunderstood everything. But I had already placed the printed screenshots on the coffee table, the messages, the photos, even the ultrasound she had sent to another man with a caption meant to shatter me. "Explain these," I said. She stared at them, her expression tightening like a mask being fastened into place. Then came the excuses. "He is just someone from the school program. He got too friendly." I should not have responded. It never meant anything. But lies sound different once you know the truth. "You sent him our ultrasound," I said. The words felt heavy, like lifting a piece of my own heart and finding it cracked. She flinched, her eyes darting away. "He was helping me understand the medical parts. That is all." "Stop," I said, and for the first time my voice cracked. She froze. That is the moment I realized she did not fear losing me. She feared losing control of the story. The next morning we sat in a quiet clinic that smelled of disinfectant and winter air, the kind of place where people learn truths they were never ready to carry. The geneticist slid a sealed envelope across the desk with the practiced indifference of someone who had watched far too many families break in that same room. Neither of us reached for it at first. She tried to whisper that we should open it at home, that we should do this together, but the time for together had already passed. I broke the seal. The page inside was thinner than I expected, almost weightless. Probability of paternity 0%. The world did not shatter. It simply dimmed, like someone turning the lights down on a life I had once pictured in vivid color. I did not think about my wife at that moment. I thought about the boy I had talked to in the quiet hours of the night, the one I imagined teaching to throw a baseball, the one I pictured sitting on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade. I had loved a future that never existed. When I finally looked at her, she began the next lie without missing a step. "I used a donor," she whispered, as if the word donor could somehow make everything clean again. "I did it for us. I wanted to give you a child. I did not want you to feel like you failed me, but lies lose their power when they have nothing left to hide behind. You expect me to believe you forgot to mention that." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "It was supposed to be a surprise," she said, her eyes shining with the performance of someone who had rehearsed her lines in advance. "You wanted a son. I thought this would make you happy." I walked out of the clinic without responding, my footsteps echoing down the hallway like a quiet verdict. And this time, when I packed my things, I did not do it in anger. I did it in acceptance. Some truths are too heavy to live with, and some lies make the air too thin to breathe. When I closed the door behind me, she let out a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a cry, something jagged and broken. But I kept walking, because the moment a man finally sees the truth, he can never unsee it. Have you ever thought a story was finally over only to realize the next chapter had been quietly waiting in the shadows, ready to step forward the moment you tried to breathe again? That was what the days after I left felt like. A strange kind of limbo where the truth had been spoken but the consequences had not yet taken their full shape. I stayed away, kept my phone face down on the nightstand of the small room I rented, trying to let the silence settle into something that resembled peace. But silence does not always mean stillness. Sometimes it is just the quiet before the next wave. Her messages began softly at first. Little ripples across the screen. "Please come home. We can fix this. I need you." Then they grew longer, heavier, edged with the kind of desperation that comes when a person realizes the story is no longer under their control. "You cannot leave me. You promised we would get through everything together." When I did not reply, the tone shifted, sharp enough to cut. "If you think you can walk away from this marriage, you are a fool. You are the father whether you want to be or not." The calls from her parents followed, layered with accusation and righteousness. "You are abandoning your family. You are leaving your pregnant wife. Men like you do not deserve forgiveness." I listened to none of them. A man can endure being misunderstood, but he should not tolerate being manipulated. And beneath all their shouting, I could hear the same trembling fear that had been in her eyes at the clinic, the fear of a truth she could no longer outrun. I thought that was the final weight I would have to carry, but life has a way of adding one more stone just when you think the pile is already high enough. A message arrived one cold morning from a name I did not recognize. "Mason, I work at the school. We need to talk about Lena." At first I ignored it, assuming it was another attempt to drag me back into the storm. But something in the wording felt different. Like a man speaking carefully because the truth he carried was heavier than he wished it to be. We met at a diner near the school, the kind with red vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like burnt hope. He introduced himself with a nervous handshake and slid his phone toward me. I did not know what to expect, but it was not what I saw. Grainy footage from a hallway camera, date stamped months earlier. Lena in a red coat, leaning far too closely toward a man I did not recognize. Her hand rested on his chest with the ease of muscle memory. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice low. She was fired 3 months ago, but the school did not make it public. There were complaints from several fathers. Things went too far. She kept pretending to come in, so her husband would not know. The words hung between us like smoke. I stared at the screen, feeling that old familiar dizziness creep back in. I had thought betrayal was a single wound, one clean strike. But no, betrayal is a blade with many edges, each one cutting a different version of the truth. A quiet thought formed in me, simple and painful. I protected her longer than she deserved. I thanked him, though I am not sure how the words made it past the tightness in my throat, and walked out into the cold air. Some truths sit in your chest like a stone. This one sat like a mountain. But there comes a moment when a man stops negotiating with heartbreak and begins accepting what is already written. That moment came when I texted her to meet me at the park near the fountain. The sky was fading into evening when she arrived, wrapped in a beige coat, her face pale beneath the streetlights. She reached for me out of habit, but I stepped back. "You told me it was a donor," I said. "Then you blamed one man. But he took a test. He is not the father." Her lips parted, a flicker of panic flashing through her eyes before the performance began again. "I do not know what you are talking about. I contacted his wife," I said. "She knows everything. And she made him take a test. He is not the father." Something in her face buckled then, the thin wall between lies bending under the pressure of truth. "I want the truth," I said. "Not the version you think I can handle. The actual truth." She let out a long breath, the kind a person exhaled when they realized the stage lights had gone out and there was no script left to read. "Fine," she said. "You want the truth. It was not just him. There were others. I wanted better genes than yours." The sentence struck with a precision I was not prepared for. Better genes than yours. Not better luck, not better timing, not better odds. Better genes. A man can endure many wounds, but an attack on his worth is the deepest cut. I stood there, not angry, not broken, simply aware of a truth so complete it needed no explanation. The woman in front of me was a stranger wearing the face of someone I once loved. I reached into my coat and held out the papers I had signed earlier that day. "Divorce," I said. "Your lawyer will explain the rest." She stared at them, as if the pages were burning. When I turned to leave, her voice cut through the cold, jagged with panic and disbelief. But I kept walking, because some stories do not need to be rewritten. They need to be closed. Have you ever had to rebuild a life from the inside out? Not because you wanted to start over, but because life itself left you no other choice. That was the quiet work that waited for me after the truth settled, after the papers were handed over, after the echoes of her voice faded into something I no longer recognized. The days that followed were not dramatic or loud. Healing rarely is. It moves slowly, like a tide pulling you back toward yourself, 1 inch at a time. The small rental I moved into was nothing more than a single bedroom with a window that faced an alleyway, but in those early weeks it felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in months, every sound in the room belonged to me. No footsteps that made my heart jump. No phone buzzing like a warning. Only the hum of the heater and the soft creak of old floorboards under my own weight. At night, I slept lightly. Sometimes I woke at 2 in the morning, expecting her beside me, expecting the familiar rustle of sheets or the quiet whisper of her breathing, but there was only stillness and the faint glow of streetlights pressing through the blinds. Living alone forces a man to face corners of himself he has ignored for years, and I was no exception. There were mornings when I sat at the edge of the bed feeling every bit of the emptiness I used to outrun. There were afternoons when the grief came not as a storm, but as a quiet ache, A reminder of the boy who was never mine and the future that dissolved with one line of text on a medical report. I tried to outrun the heaviness at first. Literally, I started jogging again, shoes hitting the pavement before sunrise, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The rhythm helped, step after step, mile after mile. The thoughts that used to twist themselves around each other began to loosen. Running did not fix anything, but it steadied me, helped me remember that my legs still worked, my lungs still filled, and that my life, despite everything, was still moving forward. Therapy came next, though I resisted it in the beginning. Men of my generation were taught to carry weight in silence, to let time be the only medicine, but time alone cannot heal what has been buried too deeply. And eventually I found myself sitting across from a counselor in a quiet office that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She asked the kind of questions that made you pause, not because they were complicated, but because they were honest. What do you want to feel? Peace, I said. And what is stopping you? I hesitated, searching for words that did not come easily. I think I am grieving the life I thought I had. She nodded slowly, as if she had heard the same sentence from 100 different mouths. Sometimes peace is not about forgetting, she said. Sometimes it is about remembering differently. Those sessions became anchors in my week, steady reminders that healing is not a destination but a practice. Slowly, the fog began to lift. I returned to work at the auto shop, the clang of tools, and the familiar smell of engine grease grounding me in ways I had forgotten. There is something honest about fixing broken things, something straightforward. When a part fails, you can replace it. When a machine stops working, you can take it apart and understand why. People are not that simple. But the steady rhythm of my job helped rebuild the parts of me that had rusted in silence. One warm afternoon, months after the papers were finalized, I saw her standing by the gate of the shop, not my ex-wife, Olivia, the woman whose life had fractured along the same fault line as mine. She looked stronger than she had the last time we spoke, but there was still a softness in her eyes, a quiet understanding born only from people who have walked through fire. I did not know where else to go, she said with a hesitant smile. I just wanted to thank you. For what? For being honest when it would have been easier to stay silent. That honesty ended my marriage, I said. She shook her head. No, the truth ended it. Honesty just gave it a voice. We walked to a nearby cafe and sat across from each other like two survivors comparing maps of the same disaster. She told me she had filed for divorce, that her husband had lost his job, that she was learning how to rebuild her own life. There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. I thought I would never feel anything again, she admitted, but now I just feel free. I nodded, understanding more deeply than I could express. Freedom does not feel like joy at first. It feels like absence. She smiled quietly, and then you realize absence is space. We did not promise to stay in touch. We did not need to. Some connections exist purely to remind you that you were not alone in the darkness. As summer approached, I packed the last box from the old apartment, the one that used to hold all the pieces of a life that had slipped through my fingers. When I closed the door, I did not look back. There is a moment in every story when the past stops calling your name, and you finally have the strength not to answer. I drove until the road curved along the coastline, the ocean stretching out beside me like a living thing. Waves rose and fell with a rhythm older than any hurt I carried. I parked near the cliffs and stepped out, letting the wind push against my shoulders. For a long time I just stood there, breathing in the salt air, feeling the world widen around me. And then, without planning to, I said the words out loud. I forgive you. Not for her but for me. Because forgiveness is not a gift to the person who hurt you. It is a way of loosening the rope around your own heart. But forgiveness does not mean return. With that same breath, I said the second truth. I am not coming back. The wind carried the words away, scattering them across the waves like ashes. When I turned to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if the road ahead had finally opened. Walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it is wisdom, and as I drove home to the life I was slowly rebuilding, I realized that every mile behind me was a lesson, and every mile ahead was a chance to start again. Now the story ends where all stories of healing begin. A man learns the truth. He faces it. He walks through the fire and comes out with scars that no longer burn. To anyone listening, especially those in their later years who have carried more than their share of heartbreak, remember this: you deserve respect, you deserve honesty, and you deserve a peace that does not ask you to shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. If you have lived through a betrayal, you are not defined by it. You are shaped by the strength it took to rise again. And if you feel moved to share your own journey, your words might help someone you will never meet. Because the older we get, the more we understand that peace is not just an idea. It is a choice, a boundary, a home we build inside ourselves. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is simply walk toward the quiet and choose to stay there.